The Grazict High Admiral Vexlor adjusted his ceremonial cape for the 14th time in as many minutes. The iridescent fabric, harvested from the silk glands of the extinct Pluvian moth whales, shimmered as it caught the light of the 3 tactical displays surrounding his command podium. "Status report," he demanded, his voice a perfect blend of aristocratic boredom and military precision. His second-in-command, Sub-Admiral Krill, hurried forward with a data slate. "The invasion fleet is assembled, High Admiral. 17,000 warships, each carrying between 2,000 and 5,000 ground troops. The Armada represents the combined military might of the Galactic Concordance. We're ready to begin the final briefing." Vexlor nodded, suppressing the flutter of anticipation in his secondary heart. After centuries of debate, arguments, and political maneuvering, the Concordance had finally authorized this mission. The last unexplored sector of the galaxy would soon fall under their benevolent control. "Bring up the holographic display of the target system," he ordered. The central tactical display shimmered, transforming into a detailed 3-dimensional map of a backwater solar system. 8 planets orbited an unremarkable yellow star. Vexlor's gaze fixed on the 3rd planet from the sun. A blue-green marble swirled with white clouds. "This," he announced, "is our target." A ripple of murmurs passed through the command bridge. The crew had been briefed, of course, but seeing the actual planet seemed to make the mission more real. "But High Admiral," one of the junior officers spoke up, "isn't that the planet from the myths? The one supposedly inhabited by humans?" Vexlor's mouthparts twisted into what passed for a smile in his species. "Indeed, the legendary Earth, home to the fabled humans." He practically dripped sarcasm with every syllable. "For centuries we've heard tales of these supposed bipedal creatures. Stories claim they're violent, resourceful, and unpredictable. Some even suggest they've developed rudimentary technology." He paused for effect, sweeping his gaze across the bridge crew. "But as we all know, extensive scans have shown nothing more than primitive radio signals and some orbital debris. If these humans exist at all, they're nothing more than pre-spaceflight primitives, possibly intelligent animals at best." The Concordance Science Directorate officially classified humans as mythological creatures 75 cycles ago. Krill cleared his throat sacs. "So the invasion is merely a formality?" "Precisely," Vexlor confirmed. "We'll secure the planet for the Concordance, catalog whatever primitive life forms might be there, and establish mining colonies. Standard procedure for an uninhabited world with resources." "And if there are primitive natives?" someone asked. Vexlor waved a dismissive appendage. "We'll establish reservations, as per Concordance protocol. They'll be studied, protected, and gradually uplifted to serve the greater galactic community." He turned back to the holographic display, zooming in on the blue-green planet. "Prepare for the final briefing. We make the jump to the target system in 6 hours. Dave Pritchard was having a spectacularly bad morning. First, his alarm had failed to go off, meaning he'd woken up 20 minutes late. Then he'd discovered his hot water heater had decided overnight that heating water was more of a philosophical concept than an actual function. The freezing shower that followed had been bracing in all the wrong ways. To top it all off, his car, a 12-year-old sedan held together by hope and aftermarket parts, had refused to start, forcing him to take public transportation to work. Now, standing in the crowded train with his travel mug of tea, he'd never acquired a taste for coffee, squashed between a teenager with music loud enough to be heard through their headphones and a businessman who apparently believed deodorant was optional, Dave was seriously reconsidering his life choices. His phone buzzed in his pocket. With contortionist-worthy moves, he managed to extract it without elbowing anyone in the face. A text from his boss. "Where are you? The Henderson presentation starts in 15 minutes. Dave looked at the time and swore under his breath. The train was running late. Of course it was. He quickly texted back. "On my way. Train delayed. Should make it just in time." As he pocketed his phone, the train lurched to an unexpected stop. The lights flickered, plunging the carriage into momentary darkness before emergency lighting kicked in. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the conductor's voice over the intercom, "we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain calm while we investigate." A collective groan rose from the passengers. "Perfect," Dave muttered. "Just perfect." The businessman beside him grunted in agreement. Mercury must be in retrograde or something. Dave was about to respond with a non-committal hum when his phone buzzed again. Expecting another message from his boss, he was surprised to see an emergency alert instead. Emergency alert. Unknown objects entering Earth's atmosphere. This is not a drill. Seek shelter immediately. As if on cue, a deep rumble shook the train carriage. It wasn't like an earthquake, more like distant thunder, but continuous and growing louder by the second. Phones throughout the carriage began buzzing and chiming as the same alert reached other passengers. The murmur of confusion quickly rose to a cacophony of concerned voices. Dave looked out the window, but could see nothing unusual from the underground tunnel. His heart rate kicked up a notch. Unknown objects entering the atmosphere? Was this a meteor shower? An asteroid? Or something else entirely? The train's intercom crackled to life again. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received emergency instructions to proceed to the nearest station. We'll be moving shortly. Please remain calm. Remain calm. Right, because that's exactly what humans do in crisis situations. Remain calm. As the train lurched forward, Dave had the distinct feeling that his bad morning was about to get significantly worse. High Admiral Vexlor watched with satisfaction as the first wave of dropships entered the planet's atmosphere. The invasion was proceeding exactly according to schedule. High Admiral, Sub-Admiral Krill reported. The Pathfinder units report no resistance. Our ships are moving into position above the major population centers. Vexlor nodded. Excellent. Begin the intimidation display. Let's see how these primitive creatures react. Across the planet, massive Concordance warships descended through the clouds, positioning themselves above major cities. It was standard protocol, a show of overwhelming force designed to prevent resistance before it began. Most primitive species surrendered immediately when faced with such a display. Sir, a communications officer called out. We're detecting a significant increase in radio transmissions from the surface. Expected, Vexlor replied. They're likely trying to coordinate some form of response. Primitive species often exhibit heightened communication during stress. But sir, the officer continued, many of these transmissions are structured. They appear to be data packets, not just audio. Vexlor frowned. Data packets? From primitives? Before he could consider the implications, another officer spoke up. High Admiral, we're detecting multiple launches from the surface. Primitive projectiles of some kind. Show me, Vexlor ordered. The tactical display shifted, showing dozens of small objects rising from various points on the planet's surface. Analysis? He demanded. Krill studied his data slate. They appear to be missiles, sir. Chemically propelled, but some contain nuclear warheads. Vexlor blinked all four eyes in surprise. Nuclear. These primitives have nuclear weapons? It appears so, sir, and they're targeting our dropships. As if to punctuate Krill's assessment, several bright flashes appeared on the tactical display. Report! Vexlor barked. We've lost contact with Dropship Group 7, an officer announced. And Groups 3 and 12 report taking damage from primitive aircraft. Aircraft? Vexlor couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. They have powered flight? Krill looked distinctly uncomfortable. It seems the intelligence on this world may have been incomplete, sir. That was the understatement of the galactic cycle. Vexlor felt his ceremonial cape suddenly becoming uncomfortably tight around his neck. Get me a visual of these primitives immediately! Dave had made it to his office building, though the Henderson presentation was now the furthest thing from his mind. The entire office was gathered in the conference room, watching the massive alien ships hovering over the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Holy shit, muttered Raj from accounting. Those are definitely not weather balloons. So much for being alone in the universe, added Eliza from HR, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. Dave stood transfixed, watching as smaller craft descended from the massive ships. Military jets screamed past the office building, heading toward the alien vessels. They're fighting back, someone whispered. As if in response, one of the smaller alien craft exploded in a ball of fire. A cheer went up from the conference room. Dave's phone rang. It was his younger brother, Alex, who worked for the Department of Defense. Dave, are you safe? Alex's voice was tense. Yeah, I'm at the office. We're watching it all happen. What the hell is going on? It's a full-scale invasion, Alex replied. But here's the weird part. They seem completely surprised that we're fighting back. Like, genuinely shocked. That doesn't make sense, Dave said. Why invade if you don't expect resistance? No idea. But listen, the military is mobilizing everything we've got. The president's already been moved to a secure location. The Chinese, Russians, Europeans, everyone's coordinating a response. Another explosion lit up the sky as an alien craft spiraled down toward the river. I gotta go, Alex said hurriedly. Stay inside, okay? This is about to get messy. The line went dead. Dave lowered his phone slowly, looking around at his coworkers. Their expressions ranged from terror to awe to determined anger. Eliza from HR straightened her blazer with a newfound resolution. Well, she said, I guess the quarterly performance reviews will have to wait. A nervous laugh rippled through the room, breaking some of the tension. Outside, more explosions peppered the sky as Earth's military forces engaged the alien invaders. Dave couldn't help but wonder what the aliens had expected. Did they really think humanity would just roll over? If so, they were in for one hell of a surprise. Impossible! Vexlor slammed his appendage against the command console. This cannot be happening. The tactical displays told a story he could scarcely believe. The primitives, the humans, were fighting back. And not just with sticks and stones, but with jet aircraft, guided missiles, and coordinated military strikes. "Hi, Admiral," Krill reported, his voice strained. "We've lost 27 dropships. The humans have activated global defense networks. They're communicating and coordinating their resistance across the entire planet." Vexler stared at the visual feed showing the humans for the first time. Bipedal, just as the myths had described, but clothed in military uniforms, operating sophisticated machinery, and fighting with a ferocity that belied their small stature. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "All our intelligence indicated a pre-spaceflight civilization at best." The science officer, Dr. Mirix, approached cautiously. "Sir, I've been analyzing their communication networks. It seems they've developed a global information system. They call it the Internet. It's remarkably sophisticated." "And their weapons?" Vexlor asked. "Nuclear fission, some early fusion, advanced chemical propellants. They're at least a Category 3 civilization, possibly verging on Category 4. The implications hit Vexlor like a gravitational hammer. The invasion plan had been designed for a Category 1 civilization, primitives who might, at best, throw spears at the dropships. "Sir," Krill interrupted, "we're detecting launches from multiple locations, much larger than before." The tactical display updated, showing massive rockets rising from different continents. "Analysis?" Vexlor barked. Dr. Mirix studied the data. "They appear to be space launch vehicles, sir. The humans are sending something into orbit." "What? What are they launching?" Before Mirix could answer, the communications officer cut in. "Hi, Admiral. We're detecting transmissions from the orbital craft. They're attempting to communicate with us." Vexlor felt all four of his heart skip a beat. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and the image of a human appeared. It wore some kind of uniform and had a determined expression on its face. "This is General Daniel Richards of the United Earth Defense Force," the human said. "You are engaged in an unprovoked attack on our planet. We demand your immediate withdrawal from Earth airspace." Vexlor stared in shock. The human was speaking Galactic Standard, with an accent certainly, but clearly comprehensible. How do you know our language?" he finally managed to ask. The human, General Richards, raised an eyebrow. "We've been monitoring your communications for decades. Did you think those satellites you detected were just for show?" "But our scans showed only primitive technology," Vexlor protested. "Yeah, about that," Richards replied with what appeared to be a smile, though Vexlor recognized it as a threat display. "We've gotten pretty good at hiding our capabilities. Call it a cultural quirk. We've been making movies about alien invasions for a century. We came prepared." Vexlor turned to Krill, who looked as shocked as he felt. "Is this some kind of trick?" Krill checked his data slate. "No, sir. The human orbital craft are genuine. And we're now detecting energy signatures from their lunar outposts as well." "Lunar outposts?" Vexlor's voice rose to a pitch he hadn't used since molting. "Indeed," General Richards continued. "Now, I'll say this one more time. Withdraw your forces immediately, or we will interpret this as an act of war and respond accordingly." Vexlor felt his ceremonial cape suddenly becoming very, very heavy. "This is a misunderstanding," he tried. "We were under the impression that your planet was uninhabited, primitive." Richards cut him off. "Yeah, we figured that's what you thought. It's why we let you get this close before showing our hand. Now you have 10 of your minutes to begin withdrawal, or we launch our full counteroffensive." The transmission cut off. Vexlor turned to his bridge crew, who were staring at him with various expressions of shock, fear, and confusion. "Orders, High Admiral?" Krill asked quietly. Vexlor looked back at the tactical display. Already the dots representing his dropships were blinking out one by one as the humans' defenses took their toll. "Recall all ground forces," he said, his voice hollow. "Prepare the fleet for emergency jump. We are withdrawing." "But sir," Krill protested, "the concordance will understand when they see our data." Vexlor cut him off. "These aren't primitives, Krill. These are humans." He spoke the word with newfound respect and more than a little fear. 3 months after what humanity had dubbed the 6-Hour War, Dave Pritchard found himself in a position he never could have imagined. As part of Earth's first diplomatic delegation to the Galactic Concordance, it turned out that his brother Alex's DoD connection, combined with Dave's own background in international business negotiations, had somehow landed him a spot on the team. "We need people who understand both military and civilian perspectives," he'd been told. Dave suspected they also needed people who wouldn't freak out at the sight of 6-limbed aliens with 4 eyes and mandibles, but he kept that thought to himself. Now, standing in the cavernous reception hall of the Concordance Assembly Station, Dave adjusted his brand-new diplomatic uniform and tried not to stare at the bewildering variety of alien species around him. "Nervous?" asked Dr. Anya Petrov, the delegation's chief xenobiologist. "Terrified," Dave admitted. 3 months ago, I was preparing a presentation on quarterly sales projections. Now I'm about to meet the leaders of a galactic government. Anya smiled. "If it makes you feel any better, they're probably more nervous than you are. We weren't supposed to exist, remember? At least not as a spacefaring civilization." That was true enough. The revelation that the Concordance had classified humans as mythological creatures had been simultaneously hilarious and insulting to most of humanity. "I still don't understand how they missed us," Dave said. "We've been broadcasting radio signals for over a century. We have satellites, space stations, lunar bases. How did they not notice?" "Actually, I have a theory about that," Anya replied. "From what we've learned about Concordance scanning technology, they're looking for specific energy signatures. Quantum field manipulators, faster-than-light residue, that sort of thing. Our technology operates on completely different principles. We might have been hiding in plain sight." Their conversation was interrupted as the massive doors at the end of the hall swung open. A procession of aliens entered, led by a particularly ornate individual in a shimmering cape. "That's High Admiral Vexlor," Anya whispered, "the one who led the invasion fleet." Dave nodded. He recognized the alien from the broadcasts during the brief conflict. Vexlor looked significantly less confident now, his posture noticeably stiff as he approached the human delegation. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, the head of Earth's diplomatic team, stepped forward. "High Admiral Vexlor, on behalf of the United Nations of Earth, I greet you." Vexlor performed a complex gesture that involved all 6 of his limbs. "Ambassador Vasquez, I return your greeting. The Galactic Concordance welcomes the representatives of Earth." He seemed to struggle slightly with the name. "Thank you for agreeing to these negotiations," Elena continued. "We believe there is much our civilizations can learn from each other." "Indeed," Vexlor replied, "though I must express once again the Concordance's regret regarding our initial contact. A most unfortunate misunderstanding." Dave had to suppress a snort. Misunderstanding was a diplomatic way of saying, "We tried to invade your planet because we thought you were all monkeys." "Perhaps," Elena suggested, "we could begin by sharing information about our respective civilizations to prevent future misunderstandings." Vexlor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. A gesture Dave had learned indicated agreement. "A wise proposal. We have prepared a comprehensive overview of the Concordance and its member species." "Excellent, and we have done the same for Earth and humanity." As the formal introductions continued, Dave found his gaze drawn to a smaller alien partially hidden behind Vexlor. This one wore what appeared to be scientific insignia, and was staring at the human delegation with undisguised curiosity. Catching Dave's eye, the alien gave a small start, then cautiously emerged from behind the High Admiral. "You are human," the alien said, its translator rendering the words with a slight mechanical accent. "Last time I checked," Dave replied with a smile. "And you are?" "Dr. Mirix, Chief Science Officer of the Concordance Exploration Fleet." The alien's eyes blinked rapidly. "I have so many questions about your species." "I bet you do," Dave said, "considering you thought we were mythological." Mirix made a sound that the translator didn't catch, possibly embarrassment. "A grave error in our xenoanthropological database, one I personally intend to correct." The alien hesitated, then added, "If I may ask, how did your species advance so quickly without being detected by the Concordance?" Dave shrugged. "We didn't know we needed to be concerned about detection. We were just doing our thing, figuring out how to live on our planet, fighting among ourselves, occasionally looking up at the stars and wondering if anyone else was out there." "Fascinating," Mirix said, eyes wide. "Most species develop space travel only after achieving planetary unity." "You developed it in the midst of ongoing conflicts?" "We're complicated like that," Dave admitted. "Competition drives innovation, but it also causes problems. We're still working on the balance." Their conversation was interrupted as Ambassador Vasquez called the delegation to order. "If you'll follow us, High Admiral, we can begin the formal discussions in the conference chamber." As the 2 groups merged and moved toward the chamber, Dave found himself walking alongside Dr. Mirix. "There is one thing I must know," the alien scientist said quietly. "During the incident, your military forces responded with remarkable efficiency, almost as if you had been expecting us." Dave couldn't help but smile. "Let's just say humans have a rich tradition of imagining first contact scenarios. Not all of them friendly." "You mean your species had already theorized about alien invasions?" "Theorized, Written books about it, made movies. That's a kind of visual entertainment. Built whole mythologies around it. We've been preparing for alien invaders for generations, even without proof they existed. Mirix's translator made a strangled sound. Your species prepared defensive protocols against a threat you had no evidence for? Welcome to humanity, Dave said with a grin. We prepare for the worst and hope for the best. It makes us seem paranoid until we're proven right. As they entered the conference chamber, Dave caught High Admiral Vexlor giving him a wary glance. It was clear the Admiral had overheard their conversation. Good, Dave thought. Let them know what they're dealing with. Because if there was one thing the 6-hour war had proven, it was that humanity wasn't just real. It was a force to be reckoned with. The negotiations had been underway for 2 weeks, and Dave was beginning to think he preferred alien invasions to galactic diplomacy. At least during an invasion, nobody expected you to memorize 17 different cultural taboos for dining with the Exertaxian delegation. He sat in his quarters aboard the Concordance station, reviewing notes for the next day's trade discussion, when his communication panel chimed. "Enter!" he called, expecting one of his fellow delegates. Instead, to his surprise, Dr. Mirix scuttled through the door, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Mr. Pritchard," the alien scientist greeted him. "I apologize for the intrusion." "No intrusion," Dave assured him, setting aside his data pad. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd developed an unexpected friendship with the curious xenoscientist. "What can I do for you?" Mirix's eyes darted around the room. "I have a proposition. Unofficial. I have not discussed this with my superiors." Now that was interesting. Dave gestured to a chair designed to accommodate non-human anatomies. "Have a seat. What's on your mind?" The alien perched on the edge of the chair. "I have been authorized to conduct a comprehensive study of human culture and history, to correct our databases. But the official channels are restrictive." "Bureaucracy," Dave nodded. "Some things are universal, I guess." "Indeed. What I propose is a direct exchange. I wish to visit Earth, to experience human culture firsthand. In return, I could arrange for you to visit several Concordance worlds." Dave raised his eyebrows. "That's a pretty major proposal, especially unofficial. Why come to me instead of Ambassador Vasquez?" Mirix's limbs shifted in what Dave had learned was embarrassment. "The ambassador is occupied with high-level negotiations, and you speak plainly. You explain things clearly. And you seem less alarmed by our anatomical differences than some of your colleagues." That made Dave laugh. "Fair enough. I've always been good with weird situations." He considered the proposal. "I'm not sure I have the authority to approve something like this, but I can certainly bring it up with our team. A cultural exchange program could be valuable." "There is another factor," Mirix said, voice lowering. "The Concordance Science Directorate is not merely interested in correcting its databases. There is considerable concern about humanity." "Concern?" Dave frowned. "What kind of concern?" "Your species developed advanced technology without quantum field manipulation. You achieved spaceflight while still engaged in planetary conflicts. You prepared defenses against threats with no empirical evidence." Mirix leaned forward. "Many in the Directorate find these traits disturbing." "So we're unpredictable. Is that it?" "Unprecedented," Mirix corrected. "No known species in the Concordance database follows your developmental pattern. Some fear what this might mean for future relations." Dave sat back, processing this. "They're afraid of us." "Not afraid," Mirix said quickly, then reconsidered. "Well, perhaps some are. Others are fascinated. I fall into the latter category. I believe humanity represents a unique evolutionary path, one the Concordance has never encountered before. Studying your species could revolutionize our understanding of sentient development. And you think a cultural exchange would help ease these concerns?" "Knowledge dispels fear," Mirix replied. "The more we understand each other, the less likely we are to have further misunderstandings." Dave couldn't argue with that logic. "All right, I'll bring it up with Ambassador Vasquez. No promises, but I think it's a good idea." Mirix's eyes blinked in rapid sequence, his species equivalent of a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Pritchard." "Call me Dave. And if this works out, you'll be calling Earth home for a while." The Cultural Exchange Program, officially dubbed the Concordance Earth Mutual Understanding Initiative, or CMUI, because bureaucracies love their acronyms, was approved with surprising speed. Perhaps both sides recognized the value in learning more about their new galactic neighbors. Dave found himself appointed as Dr. Mirix's official guide to Earth, a position he accepted with equal parts excitement and trepidation. Showing an alien scientist around his home planet wasn't exactly covered in his business degree. They began with New York City, where the United Nations headquarters had been expanded to include a new extraterrestrial relations division. The towering skyscrapers and bustling streets provided Mirix with his first true glimpse of human urban life. The scale of construction is impressive, the alien observed as they walked through Times Square, drawing curious but increasingly less shocked stares from passers-by. 3 months after first contact, humans were adjusting to the reality of aliens with remarkable adaptability. But why so vertical? The Concordance typically builds horizontally. Limited space, Dave explained, especially on islands like Manhattan. Plus, humans have always liked building upward. There's something about touching the sky that appeals to us. Mirix made notes on his data device. A remnant of pre-spaceflight yearning for the stars, perhaps? Maybe. Or maybe we just like the view from up high. They continued their tour, with Mirix expressing fascination at the diversity of human cultures, cuisines, and customs. The alien was particularly intrigued by art museums, spending hours studying everything from Renaissance masterpieces to modern abstract installations. Your species creates representations with no practical purpose, he noted in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Purely for aesthetic and emotional response. Don't concordance species create art? Dave asked. Of course, but it typically serves a communal or ritual function. Creating art solely for individual expression is less common. As weeks turned into months, their tour expanded globally. They visited Tokyo, where Mirix was overwhelmed by the sensory intensity of the city. Cairo, where the aliens stood in awe before the pyramids. Rio de Janeiro, where the concept of carnival left him thoroughly confused but delighted. Throughout it all, Dave found himself seeing his own world through new eyes. Explaining human customs and history to an outsider made him reflect on aspects of humanity he'd always taken for granted. Your species has fought countless wars against itself, Mirix observed one evening as they sat in a pub in London. Yet you've preserved the artifacts and monuments of your enemies. You build museums dedicated to conflicts you hope never to repeat. We try to learn from our mistakes, Dave said, though we're not always successful. It's contradictory, Mirix noted. Violent yet sentimental, divisive yet unified when threatened. I'm beginning to understand why the Concordance databases classified humans as mythological. Your species defies conventional categorization. Dave sipped his beer. Is that good or bad? It's unpredictable. The Concordance values stability and predictability. Humanity represents a variable the Concordance has never encountered. Well, Dave said with a smile, you'd better get used to it. We're here to stay. 6 months into the cultural exchange, Dave found himself on the bridge of a Concordance diplomatic vessel, approaching the capital world of the Galactic Concordance. As promised, Mirix had arranged for Dave to visit several alien worlds in return for his guidance on Earth. Prepare for your first view of Harmonium, Mirix said, standing beside him at the viewport. The ship emerged from faster-than-light travel, and Dave's breath caught in his throat. Below them spread a planet unlike anything he'd imagined, a world of sweeping crystalline structures that caught the light of 3 suns, creating prismatic displays across the surface. It's beautiful, Dave whispered. The collective achievement of 27 species working in harmony for 15,000 years, Mirix explained with evident pride. The physical embodiment of the Concordance's founding principles. As they descended toward the surface, Dave could see the horizontal sprawl Mirix had mentioned, the city extending in perfectly planned geometric patterns across the landscape, rather than reaching upward like human cities. No skyscrapers, he noted. No need, Mirix replied. Harmonium was designed from the beginning as the Concordance capital. Space was allocated according to mathematical principles of optimal efficiency. The landing was smooth, and soon Dave found himself walking through the central plaza of the Concordance capital, the first human to set foot on Harmonium. The architecture was breathtaking, all flowing lines and impossible curves that seemed to defy gravity. How do they do that? He asked, pointing to a structure that appeared to float above the ground. Quantum field manipulation, Mirix explained. The technology your species developed without. They proceeded to the Science Directorate, where Dave was scheduled to give a presentation on human culture to the leading xenoscientists of the Concordance. Despite months of preparation, he felt a flutter of nervousness as they entered the grand chamber. Dozens of alien species filled the tiered seating, all turning to stare as Dave entered. Some had obviously never seen a human before, their reactions ranging from curiosity to visible discomfort. At the center of the chamber stood High Admiral Vexlor, now apparently serving in a diplomatic capacity. Beside him was an imposing figure Mirix identified as Supreme Director Ozvatu, the head of the Science Directorate. Welcome, David Pritchard of Earth, Ozvatu's translator rendered in slightly mechanical tones. The Science Directorate is honored by your presence. Dave bowed slightly, as he'd been coached. The honor is mine, Supreme Director. Thank you for the invitation to share information about my species and homeworld. Before you begin your presentation, Vexlor interjected, there is a matter I wish to address. The Admiral's posture was stiff, his ceremonial cape, apparently a permanent fixture, rustling as he stepped forward. The Concordance's attempt to classify humanity as mythological was the greatest scientific error in our recent history. As the officer who led the misguided exploration mission to Earth, I wish to formally apologize. The chamber fell silent. From Mirex's barely suppressed reaction, Dave gathered that public apologies were not common in Concordance culture. Hi, Admiral, Dave replied carefully. Humanity accepts your apology. We consider the incident closed and look forward to a more peaceful relationship moving forward. Vexlor's four eyes blinked in sequence. Your species is remarkably forgiving of an attempted planetary invasion. Dave couldn't help but smile. Well, we did shoot down quite a few of your ships. We consider it even. A ripple of what might have been laughter, or its alien equivalent, passed through the chamber. Now, Dave continued, activating the holographic display he'd been provided. I'd like to tell you about humanity. Not the myths, not the misunderstandings, but who we really are. For the next 2 hours, Dave presented a comprehensive overview of human history, culture, and achievements. He didn't sugarcoat the darker aspects, the wars, the environmental damage, the ongoing conflicts. But he also highlighted humanity's resilience, creativity, and capacity for growth. We're not perfect, he concluded. We're contradictory, stubborn, and sometimes self-destructive. But we're also curious, adaptable, and determined. We reached for the stars not because we had achieved perfect unity, but because looking outward is part of who we are. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before the chamber erupted in the Concordance equivalent of applause. A rhythmic tapping of appendages against surfaces. Supreme Director Osvatu rose. David Pritchard of Earth, your presentation has been most illuminating. The Science Directorate will need to completely revise its understanding of sentient development, based on humanity's unique evolutionary path. The alien leader paused, all four eyes focused intently on Dave. There is, however, one question that continues to perplex us. How did your species develop such advanced defensive capabilities without having encountered external threats? Your movies about alien invasions predate any actual contact with extraterrestrial life. Dave considered the question carefully. It was one Mirex had asked in various forms during their months together. I think, he said finally, it's because humans have always been our own greatest threat. We developed weapons to use against each other, then imagined how we might use them against hypothetical invaders. Our fiction, our stories, helped us prepare for possibilities we had no evidence for. You prepare for threats that do not exist, Osvatu stated, seemingly troubled by the concept. We prepare for threats that might exist, Dave corrected. And sometimes, as your invasion fleet discovered, those preparations pay off. The remainder of Dave's tour through Concordance space passed in a blur of exotic worlds, bizarre alien customs, and diplomatic functions. He visited the crystalline hive cities of the insectoid Zakoreth, floated through the gas giant habitats of the Etherian drift mines, and even observed the silicon-based lithomorphs in their volcanic homes on Pyrex 7. Throughout it all, he documented everything for Earth's rapidly expanding xenoanthropology departments. The exchange of knowledge flowed both ways, with Concordance scientists feverishly updating their databases on humanity, while human researchers absorbed centuries of accumulated galactic knowledge. On his final evening before returning to Earth, Dave found himself on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel, gazing out at the spiral arms of the galaxy. Mirex joined him, the alien scientist now comfortable enough in his presence to forego formal greetings. Your species has a saying, Mirex noted, a penny for your thoughts. Though I still do not understand the relationship between small copper disks and cognitive processes. Dave smiled. It's just an expression. I was thinking about how much has changed in less than a year. This time last year, humanity thought we were alone in the universe. Now we're establishing diplomatic relations with a galactic government of hundreds of species. And the Concordance thought humans were mythological creatures, Mirex added. Now we recognize you as perhaps the most unpredictable species we have ever encountered. Is that still concerning to your people? Mirex's limbs shifted in what Dave now recognized as thoughtfulness. Yes and no. The Science Directorate remains cautious. But there is also excitement. Humanity represents new possibilities, new ways of thinking. Speaking of new possibilities, Dave said, I've been authorized to discuss an expanded exchange program. Earth would like to send more representatives, scientists, diplomats, even ordinary citizens to learn about the Concordance and we'd welcome more of your people to visit Earth. The Supreme Director will be pleased, Mirix replied. There is already considerable interest in human culture among many concordant species. Your movies about alien invasions have become particularly popular, ironically enough. Dave laughed. Well, we've had a lot of practice imagining first contact scenarios, though I don't think anyone predicted it would actually happen, because an alien admiral thought we were monkeys. A misconception I still find deeply embarrassing, came a familiar voice from behind them. Dave turned to see High Admiral Vexlor approaching, his ceremonial cape somehow even more elaborate than before. High Admiral? Dave greeted him with a small bow. No need for continued embarrassment. Misunderstandings happen, even on a planetary scale. Vexlor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Your capacity for humor in the face of what could have been an interstellar conflict continues to baffle me, David Pritchard. Call it a human trait, Dave replied. We often use humor to cope with stressful situations. Indeed. One of many traits my preliminary invasion report failed to account for. Vexlor's posture shifted to something more formal. I came to inform you that the Concordance High Council has officially approved the expanded exchange program. They have also authorized me to extend an invitation to your United Nations to send a permanent ambassador to Harmonium. Dave's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's faster than expected. The diplomatic channels usually move more slowly. The High Council has determined that rapid integration of Earth into galactic affairs is a priority, Vexlor explained. Some members expressed concern that leaving humanity to develop in isolation might lead to unpredictable outcomes. They're still afraid of us, Dave translated. Cautious, Vexlor corrected. As you yourself admitted, humans developed weapons first and asked questions later. The Concordance prefers to ensure potential threats become allies instead. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer? Dave suggested. Mirix's translator made a strangled sound as it attempted to process the idiom. But Vexlor seemed to grasp the concept. A pragmatic approach, the Admiral acknowledged, though I would prefer to consider Earth a potential friend rather than a potential enemy. So would I, Dave agreed, and I think most of humanity would say the same, now that the shooting has stopped. Vexlor's mouthparts formed what Dave had learned to recognize as a smile. Then perhaps both our species have learned something valuable from our misunderstanding. As the Admiral departed, Dave turned back to the viewport and the galaxy beyond. Somewhere out there, Earth continued its orbit around an unremarkable yellow star, its inhabitants still adjusting to the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe. A penny for your thoughts, Mirix said, attempting the human idiom with charming awkwardness. Dave smiled. I was just thinking that for a mythological species, we've made quite an impression on the galaxy. Indeed, Mirix agreed. Perhaps that is the most human trait of all, turning fiction into reality through sheer determination. 1 year to the day after the 6-hour war, Dave stood on the newly constructed Concordance Embassy grounds in Geneva, watching as the massive alien diplomatic vessel descended through Earth's atmosphere. Unlike the warships of the invasion fleet, this craft had been designed with aesthetic considerations in mind, all sweeping curves and iridescent surfaces that caught the sunlight. Nervous? Asked a familiar voice. Dave turned to see his brother Alex approaching, now wearing the uniform of the newly formed Earth Defense and Diplomatic Corps. A little, Dave admitted. Being the first human on a Concordance world was one thing. Officially welcoming the first Concordance ambassador to Earth feels even bigger somehow. Alex nodded, looking up at the descending ship. Hard to believe it's only been a year. Sometimes it feels like we've been dealing with aliens forever. And sometimes it feels like first contact was yesterday. Humanity adapts quickly, Dave said. The Concordance is still trying to understand how we went from aliens are invading to welcome to our planet in 12 months. They're still scared of us, aren't they? Alex asked quietly. Dave considered the question. Not scared exactly, more cautiously fascinated. We don't fit their models of how civilizations develop. We're unpredictable. Good, Alex said with a grin. Keeps them on their toes. The diplomatic vessel completed its landing sequence, settling gracefully onto the embassy's central platform. A hush fell over the gathered dignitaries as the ship's main hatch opened, revealing a ramp that extended to the ground. First to emerge was High Admiral Vexlor, now officially the Concordance's diplomatic liaison to Earth. Behind him came a procession of alien officials representing various Concordant species, each more exotic than the last. Dave spotted Mirix among them, the scientist having been appointed as the Concordance's chief cultural attaché to Earth, a position created specifically to facilitate understanding between the two civilizations. Finally, a tall, imposing figure emerged, Supreme Director Ozavatu herself, now serving as the Concordance's first ambassador to Earth. Her elaborate ceremonial garments shimmered with embedded quantum field manipulators, creating a subtle aurora effect around her. As the alien delegation approached the receiving line of human dignitaries, Dave found himself standing straighter. Whatever his official title, cultural liaison, first contact specialist, or just the guy who showed an alien around Earth, he was now part of something historic. The UN Secretary-General stepped forward to greet Ambassador Ozavatu with the newly established interspecies diplomatic protocol, a gesture that combined elements of human handshakes with concordance greeting rituals. On behalf of the United Nations and all humanity, the Secretary-General announced, I welcome the representatives of the Galactic Concordance to Earth. Ozavatu performed a complex gesture involving all 6 of her limbs. On behalf of the 718 species of the Galactic Concordance, I thank you for this welcome. We come in peace and friendship, seeking to right past wrongs and build a new future together. As the formal greetings continued, Mirix managed to make his way to Dave's side. Your world has changed much in the past year, the alien scientist observed quietly. Dave nodded. First contact tends to do that, but humans are adaptable. Perhaps the most adaptable species we have ever encountered, Mirix agreed. The Science Directorate is still processing the implications. And what about you? Dave asked. What do you think about humanity now, after spending so much time with us? Mirix's eyes blinked in rapid sequence, his equivalent of a thoughtful smile. I think, he said carefully, that the galaxy will never be the same now that humans have joined it. And I think that may be for the best. The formal ceremony continued, with speeches about cooperation, mutual understanding, and shared futures. Dave listened with half an ear, his thoughts drifting to the incredible journey of the past year. From a disastrous morning commute interrupted by an alien invasion, to standing here as part of humanity's first interstellar diplomatic corps. As if reading his thoughts, Alex leaned over and whispered, Not bad for a guy who was worried about missing a business presentation a year ago. Dave suppressed a laugh. Life takes some unexpected turns. Especially when aliens invade because they think humans are mythological creatures. Hey, it worked out in the end. As the ceremony concluded and the gathered dignitaries began moving toward the embassy building for the reception, High Admiral Vexlor approached Dave. David Pritchard, the Admiral greeted him formally. It seems appropriate that you should be present for this historic occasion, given your role in our initial misunderstanding. Dave smiled. I wouldn't have missed it, High Admiral. Though I have to say your arrival today was much more pleasant than last time. Indeed, less explosions, more speeches. Vexlor's mouth parts twitched in what might have been amusement. I have been authorized to inform you that the Concordance High Council has approved your proposal for a human delegation to visit our central archives. They are particularly interested in your species' perspective on our historical records. That's great news, Dave replied. Our historians and anthropologists have been chomping at the bit for access. Vexlor's translator paused momentarily before rendering chomping at the bit, then continued. There is one condition. The High Council requests that you personally lead the delegation. Dave blinked in surprise. Me? I'm not a historian or a scientist. No, Vexlor agreed. But you have demonstrated a unique ability to translate between our cultures. The Council values this skill above academic credentials in this instance. Before Dave could respond, a commotion near the embassy entrance caught their attention. A group of protesters had somehow made it past the security perimeter, waving signs with anti-alien slogans. Not everyone on your planet welcomes our presence, Vexlor observed quietly. Change is difficult, Dave acknowledged. Some humans fear the unknown. Others resent the disruption to their understanding of humanity's place in the universe. It will take time. Time, Vexlor repeated. A luxury the invasion fleet did not afford you. True, but maybe that worked in our favor. Nothing unites humans like a common threat. The security forces were quickly and peacefully removing the protesters, the incident barely disrupting the proceedings. Most of the dignitaries hadn't even noticed. Your brother serves in your military, yes? Vexlor asked, changing the subject. Dave nodded. Department of Defense. Now part of the Earth Defense and Diplomatic Corps. An interesting combination of functions, defense and diplomacy. We thought it made sense, given our first contact experience, Dave explained. The same people who understand how to fight aliens should also understand how to talk to them. Prevents misunderstandings. Vexlor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. A pragmatic approach. The Concordance maintains separate military and diplomatic hierarchies, but I see the logic in your system. As they moved into the embassy building for the reception, Dave found himself reflecting on the improbability of it all, standing beside the alien Admiral who had once attempted to invade his planet, now discussing organizational structures like colleagues. The reception hall was a marvel of cross-species architecture, designed to accommodate the varied physiological needs of different alien species, while still maintaining an aesthetic that humans would find welcoming. The result was something entirely new, neither human nor concordance, but a blend of both. Servers circulated with trays containing both Earth delicacies and concordance nutritional offerings. Dave noticed with amusement that some brave human diplomats were cautiously sampling alien cuisine, while several concordance officials were experiencing their first taste of human food. "Your chocolate is causing quite a sensation among my staff," Vexlor noted, following Dave's gaze to where a group of aliens were reacting with evident delight to the Earth treat. "The biochemistry is unique but compatible with most concordance species." "One of our better inventions," Dave agreed, "though I'd advise caution with the wine. Alcohol affects different species in very different ways. A wise precaution. We have already established protocols for cross-species consumption." As the reception continued, Dave found himself increasingly at ease. A year ago, the sight of aliens would have sent him running for cover. Now, he was casually chatting with the commander of what had been an invasion fleet, discussing the finer points of interspecies cuisine. "You know," he said to Vexlor, "a year ago I was having the worst morning of my life. My alarm didn't go off, my shower was freezing, my car wouldn't start, and I was late for work. Then aliens invaded." "And now?" Vexlor asked. Dave looked around at the reception, humans and aliens mingling, learning about each other, building the foundations of what might someday be a true interstellar community. "Now I'm thinking that was actually the best bad morning I ever had." Vexlor's translator seemed to struggle with the paradox before rendering a response. "The Concordance has a saying, the most unexpected journeys often lead to the most valuable destinations." "I like that," Dave said. "We have a similar one. Everything happens for a reason." "Do you believe that?" Vexlor asked, his tone genuinely curious. Dave considered the question. "I don't know if I believe in some grand cosmic plan, but I do think we can find meaning in the chaos, purpose in the accidents, like an accidental invasion leading to peaceful contact between civilizations. Exactly like that." As the evening progressed, Dave found himself moving between conversations, bridging gaps between human and alien perspectives, translating not just words but concepts and cultural contexts. It was exhausting but deeply satisfying work. Near the end of the reception, he found a moment of quiet on one of the embassy's balconies, looking out over the lights of Geneva and the starry sky above. "A penny for your thoughts," came Mirix's voice as the alien scientist joined him on the balcony. Dave smiled at his friend's now perfect delivery of the human idiom. "I was just thinking about myths becoming reality." "Ah, yes, the mythological humans who turned out to be all too real." "Not just that," Dave said. "Humans have myths about peaceful contact with alien civilizations, about Earth joining a galactic community. For generations, those were just stories. Now they're becoming reality." Mirix considered this. "Perhaps that is the true power of your species, to imagine possibilities, and then bring them into being through sheer determination." "Maybe," Dave agreed. "Or maybe we just got lucky that the aliens who found us were open to talking instead of just conquering." "After the initial misunderstanding was resolved," Mirix added with what Dave now recognized as dry humor. "After the initial misunderstanding," Dave conceded with a laugh. Below them, the lights of the embassy complex shimmered, a small island of interstellar cooperation on a planet still coming to terms with its new place in the cosmic order. Above, the stars seemed somehow closer, more accessible than they had a year ago. "So," Mirix said after a comfortable silence, "will you accept the High Council's invitation to lead the human delegation to the archives?" Dave looked at his alien friend in surprise. "Vexlor just told me about that. How did you know?" "I may have suggested it," Mirix admitted. "The Science Directorate values my assessment of human capabilities, and I assessed you as uniquely qualified." "I'm not sure I am," Dave said honestly. "There are better historians, better diplomats, better scientists, but none who understand both humanity and the Concordance as you do," Mirix countered. "None who have demonstrated your capacity to bridge the gap between our civilizations." Dave looked back at the stars, considering the offer. A year ago, he'd been worried about a business presentation. Now he was being asked to lead humanity's first major research expedition into galactic history. "Life really does take some unexpected turns," he murmured. "Is that a yes?" Mirix pressed. Dave smiled. "Yes, I'll lead the delegation. Excellent. I shall inform the High Council immediately. As Mirix hurried back inside, Dave remained on the balcony, contemplating the future, not just his own, but humanity's. The universe had suddenly become much larger and more complex, full of new challenges and opportunities. And it had all started with an alien admiral who believed humans were just a myth. Epilogue. 5 years later. The observation deck of the United Earth diplomatic vessel. Curiosity offered a spectacular view of the approaching Concordant Central Archives, a massive orbital structure circling the capital world of Harmonium. The archives resembled a great crystalline snowflake, with 6 main arms extending from a central hub, each housing the collected knowledge of thousands of years of galactic civilization. Magnificent, isn't it? Asked Dr. Anya Petrov, now the head of Earth's Xenoarchaeological Division. Dave nodded, adjusting the collar of his diplomatic uniform. 5 years of representing humanity across the galaxy had made the formal attire more comfortable, but he still missed the simplicity of his old business suits. Hard to believe it contains over 50,000 years of galactic history, he said. And we're the first humans to access it, Anya added with barely contained excitement. The historical and scientific value is incalculable. The Curiosity docked with one of the archive's reception bays, where a familiar figure awaited them. Dr. Mirix, now the Concordance's ambassador to Earth, having been promoted after the success of the initial cultural exchange programs. David Pritchard, Mirix greeted him formally, then broke into the more casual tone they used in private. It is good to see you again, my friend. And you, Ambassador, Dave replied with a smile. The promotion suits you. As does yours, Mirix noted, indicating the insignia on Dave's uniform that marked him as Earth's cultural ambassador to the Concordance. Who would have thought an interrupted commute would lead to such distinguished careers for both of us? Dave laughed. Life's funny that way. As they moved through the archive's reception area, Dave introduced the team of human scholars who had accompanied him. Historians, linguists, anthropologists, and scientists from dozens of Earth nations, all eager to access the wealth of knowledge contained in the archives. The High Council has granted your team unrestricted access to all non-classified sections, Mirix explained as they walked, which constitutes approximately 97% of the total archive. And the other 3%? Dave asked with a raised eyebrow. Mirix's eyes blinked in sequence. Current military dispositions, certain technological specifications, and some ongoing diplomatic negotiations. Standard security protocols. Understood, Dave nodded. We have similar restrictions at the UN archives. They reached the central hub of the archive structure, a vast circular chamber with soaring ceilings and terminals accessing the archive's database. The human scholars dispersed, each heading to their assigned research stations with barely contained excitement. There is one section I thought might interest you personally, Mirix said, leading Dave to a private terminal. It has just been completed. The screen activated at Mirix's touch, displaying a title in both Concordance Standard and English. Humanity, From Myth to Reality, The Revised History. The Science Directorate's new official entry on human civilization, Mirix explained, replacing the previous entry that classified your species as mythological. Dave scrolled through the comprehensive document, noting the detailed and largely accurate account of human history, culture, and achievements. The entry included information on Earth's rapid integration into galactic affairs, the establishment of human colonies on previously uninhabited worlds within Concordance space, and the ongoing cultural and technological exchanges. Much more accurate than mythological creatures, Dave observed with a smile. Indeed, though I must admit there was a certain poetry to the old entry. Humans, bipedal beings of legend, said to possess remarkable adaptability and an unusual fixation on preparing for threats that do not exist. Well, that last part turned out to be useful, Dave pointed out. Precisely why the new entry includes an entire section on humanity's unique evolutionary path and cognitive tendencies, Mirix replied. The Concordance has learned much from humanity in these 5 years. And we've learned from you, Dave said. Earth's scientific and technological development has advanced by centuries thanks to Concordance knowledge. They moved to one of the archive's panoramic viewports, looking out at the spectacular view of Harmonium below and the galaxy beyond. 5 years ago, our civilizations were strangers to each other, Mirix observed. Now we are building a shared future together. Not bad for a mythological species, Dave replied with a grin. Indeed not, came a familiar voice from behind them. Dave turned to see High Admiral Vexlor, now Supreme Commander Vexlor of the Combined Concordance Earth Defense Fleet, approaching. His ceremonial cape, if anything, had grown even more elaborate with his promotion. "Supreme Commander," Dave greeted him with a respectful nod. "Congratulations on your new position." "Thank you, Ambassador Pritchard," Vexlor replied formally, then added in a more casual tone, "though I sometimes miss the simplicity of merely commanding an invasion fleet." "Easier than coordinating joint defense exercises between 17 different Earth nations and 32 concordant species?" Dave asked with a smile. "Considerably," Vexlor confirmed. "Human military protocols are uniquely diverse. We like to keep things interesting." "That you do." Vexlor turned to look out at the viewport. "The combined fleet is conducting exercises near the Orion Arm. Our first joint deep space operations." "I heard," Dave said. "My brother Alex is participating as part of the Earth contingent. Commander Alexander Pritchard has proven to be an exemplary officer," Vexlor noted. "His tactical innovations have been most educational for our fleet commanders. He always did have a knack for thinking outside the box. A very human trait," Mirix observed, "and one the Concordance has come to value, despite initial concerns." The three of them stood in comfortable silence for a moment, contemplating how far their respective civilizations had come in just 5 years. From near conflict to alliance, from misunderstanding to mutual respect. "I have something for you," Vexlor said finally, producing a small data crystal. "The complete records of the invasion fleet's mission to Earth, including my personal log entries from before, during, and after the incident." Dave accepted the crystal with surprise. "That's unexpected. Thank you." The High Council felt it appropriate for Earth's archives to contain the complete record from both perspectives, Vexlor explained, for historical accuracy. "And as a reminder," Mirix added, "that even the most confident assumptions can be mistaken." Dave nodded, pocketing the crystal. "We have a saying on Earth. History is written by the winners. In this case," Vexlor replied, "perhaps history is best written together, by those who learned from their mistakes." As Supreme Commander Vexlor departed to attend to his duties, Dave turned back to the viewport, the data crystal a small weight in his pocket, a record of the day the mythological humans had proven themselves all too real. "You know," he said to Mirix, 5 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing in an alien archive station as Earth's ambassador to a galactic civilization, I'd have thought they were crazy. And if someone had told me I would be friends with a member of a species I believed to be mythological, I would have questioned their neural function," Mirix replied. Dave laughed. "I guess we've both come a long way from humans are just a myth." "Indeed," Mirix agreed, "though it does make for an excellent story." And as they turned to join the human scholars exploring the vastness of galactic knowledge, Dave couldn't help but think that sometimes the best stories were the ones that began with the most unlikely of premises, like an alien admiral who didn't believe humans were real until they shot down his invasion fleet. Some myths, it turned out, were more than just myths after all. The end. "You know what they say about first impressions?" "Yeah, well, nobody told that to General Vexthara of the Keth'moran Empire when she decided to announce humanity's impending subjugation via holographic transmission to every major population center on Earth. Because nothing says diplomatic relations quite like showing up unannounced in someone's living room as a 12-foot-tall blue reptilian overlord and demanding they bow down." Captain Daniel Cross was having what he'd generously describe as one of those weeks when the transmission crackled to life in the bridge of the UES Defiance. You know the kind, where your morning coffee tastes like recycled coolant, your chief engineer is 3 days behind on repairs, and oh yeah, apparently the galaxy's most feared military commander has decided your species needs a lesson in humility. "Citizens of Earth," the hologram began, her voice carrying that particular brand of aristocratic contempt that only comes from centuries of unopposed conquest. "I am General Vexthara, Supreme Commander of the Keth'moran Third Fleet. Your pathetic little civilization has somehow managed to stumble beyond your solar system, and frankly, we find this presumptuous." Cross leaned back in his captain's chair, watching the display with the kind of detached amusement usually reserved for watching someone else's kids have a meltdown in a grocery store. Around him, the bridge crew exchanged glances that ranged from nervous to distinctly unimpressed. "The Keth'moran Empire has ruled this sector for over 10,000 of your years," Vexthara continued, apparently warming to her theme. "We have crushed 17 civilizations, absorbed their technologies, and added their biological distinctiveness to our own. Your species will kneel before the might of the Empire, or you will be exterminated. These are your only options. Well, Cross said conversationally to his XO, Commander Elena Vasquez. She seems nice. Vasquez snorted. Real charmer. I especially like the part where she gives us two choices and they're both terrible. The hologram flickered, and for a moment Vexthara's massive form seemed to lean forward, as if she could somehow peer through the transmission into every human settlement simultaneously. You have 72 of your hours to consider our generous offer. After that, we will demonstrate why resistance is not merely futile, it is laughably inadequate. The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge in that particular kind of silence that follows truly spectacular threats. You know, the kind where everyone's mentally calculating their odds of survival and coming up with numbers that would make a statistician weep. So, Cross said finally, anyone else think she was compensating for something with that whole Supreme Commander of Everything Ever routine? Now, here's where most stories would launch into a montage of frantic preparation, desperate scientific breakthroughs, and stirring speeches about humanity's indomitable spirit. And sure, there was some of that, but mostly there was a lot of standing around trying to figure out exactly how screwed they were. The answer, according to the hastily convened emergency session of the United Earth Defense Council, was catastrophically. The Keth'moran fleet that had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system numbered in the thousands. Each ship was roughly the size of Manhattan, and armed with weapons that made human nuclear arsenals look like particularly aggressive fireworks displays. The technological disparity is significant, reported Dr. Alan Torres, head of the Xenotechnology Research Division, in what had to be the understatement of the millennium. Their smallest frigates outgun our heaviest battleships by a factor of roughly 50 to 1. Their capital ships, well, let's just say that trying to fight them conventionally would be like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. A gunfight where the other guy has a particle accelerator. Cross attended the briefing via hologram from the Defiance, which was currently positioned somewhere in the asteroid belt with the rest of humanity's mighty space fleet. All 27 ships of it. Because nothing says galactic superpower quite like being able to count your entire military on your fingers and toes. What about their shields? Asked Admiral Rebecca Hartley, the Defense Council's chairwoman and someone who'd spent the last 40 years preparing for interstellar war. Unfortunately, she'd been preparing for the kind where both sides had roughly equivalent technology. Not the kind where one side might as well be throwing rocks. Adaptive energy barriers, Torres replied grimly. They analyze incoming attacks and adjust their frequency modulation in real time. Our weapons would be marginally effective for perhaps the first few shots, then completely useless. Armor? Self-repairing metamaterial matrix. Essentially, you'd need to destroy their entire ship all at once to prevent it from simply fixing whatever damage you manage to inflict. Cross watched the faces around the conference table through his holographic feed, noting the particular shade of pale that people get when they realize they're about to become a footnote in someone else's history book. It was not, he reflected, a good look on anyone. All right, Admiral Hartley said finally. What about their weaknesses? Every species has them. Even humanity has weaknesses. Such as? Torres asked. We're terrible at following orders, we overthink everything, and we have an inexplicable tendency to make jokes when we should be taking things seriously. Cross offered helpfully. Several people turned to stare at his hologram with expressions that suggested they weren't entirely sure he was kidding. The point is, Hartley continued with the kind of determined optimism that military officers develop as a survival mechanism, there has to be something, some tactical weakness, some psychological blind spot we can exploit. Torres pulled up a series of holographic displays showing Keth'moran physiology, technology, and military doctrine. Well, they're remarkably standardized. Same basic body plan across their entire species. Large, reptilian, extremely long-lived. Their technology is advanced but monolithic, and their military operates on strict hierarchical principles that haven't changed significantly in millennia. Meaning they're incredibly efficient, but they don't adapt well to unexpected situations. They've conquered 17 civilizations using essentially the same playbook every time. Overwhelming technological superiority, demand for surrender, systematic destruction of resistance. Cross leaned forward in his chair, something tickling at the back of his mind. What happened to the civilizations that surrendered? Absorbed into the Empire as client species. They're given basic rights, allowed to maintain their cultural identity within certain parameters, and integrated into the Keth'moran economic system. And the ones that fought? Torres hesitated. Complete extinction. Not just military defeat, total biological eradication. The Keth'morans don't believe in leaving potential threats behind. The room fell silent again. This time with the kind of quiet that settles over people when they realize that surrender might actually be the smart play. Which, Cross had to admit, was a distinctly uncomfortable realization for a species that had spent the last few centuries making movies about the nobility of hopeless last stands. "So what's it going to be?" Admiral Hartley asked finally. "Do we fight an unwinnable war, or do we kneel?" The thing about humans, Cross reflected as he stood on the observation deck of the Defiance watching the distant glint of the Keth'moran fleet, is that they're fundamentally contrary. Tell them they can't do something and they'll immediately start figuring out how to do it anyway. Tell them they have to do something and they'll spend remarkable amounts of time and energy finding ways to avoid it. And tell them they have to kneel? Well, that's when things get interesting. The decision, when it came down from the Defense Council 12 hours later, was both predictable and slightly insane. They were going to surrender. Officially. Sort of. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Hartley announced to the assembled fleet commanders, "we're going to give General Vexthara exactly what she asked for. We're going to kneel." Cross blinked. "I'm sorry. What now?" "We're going to surrender," Hartley continued. "But we're going to do it in the most technically correct, bureaucratically nightmarish way possible. Dr. Torres has been analyzing their cultural protocols, and it turns out the Keth'morans are absolutely obsessed with proper procedure." Torres nodded, pulling up a series of documents that looked like they'd been translated through about 15 different languages and a particularly sadistic legal dictionary. "Their entire society is built around rigid hierarchical structures and ceremonial protocols. When they demand surrender, they're not just asking for military capitulation. They're invoking a specific cultural framework that has hundreds of associated rituals, procedures, and requirements." "Which means?" asked Commander Vasquez, who was attending the briefing from her post on the Defiance. "Which means," Hartley said with the kind of smile that usually preceded either brilliant victories or spectacular disasters, "that if they want us to kneel, they're going to have to follow their own rules about how that's supposed to work." Cross stared at the holographic display showing what appeared to be the Keth'moran equivalent of Robert's Rules of Order, if Robert had been a 12-foot-tall reptilian bureaucrat with obsessive-compulsive disorder. "You're telling me we're going to defeat a superior alien force through paperwork?" "We're going to annoy them to death through paperwork," Torres corrected. "There's a difference." The plan, when Cross finally got all the details, was either the most brilliant piece of strategic thinking in human history or the most elaborate suicide note ever written. Possibly both. Step 1. Respond to General Vexthara's ultimatum by formally requesting the proper protocols for surrender negotiations. Step 2. Insist on following every single ceremonial requirement, no matter how archaic or ridiculous. Step 3. Drag out the process long enough to, well, nobody was entirely sure what Step 3 was supposed to accomplish, but it had to be better than immediate extinction. The beauty of it, Torres explained as he walked Cross through the plan, is that their own cultural programming won't let them skip steps. They've spent 10,000 years building a society where following proper procedure isn't just important, it's literally who they are. They can't just ignore their own protocols without fundamentally undermining the entire basis of their civilization. And if they decide to just blast us anyway? Then we die, Torres said cheerfully. But at least we'll die having made them really, really annoyed first. Cross had to admit there was a certain appeal to the idea. If humanity was going to go out, they might as well go out being authentically human, which is to say, unreasonably stubborn and inexplicably fixated on technicalities. The response was transmitted exactly 68 hours after Vexthara's initial ultimatum, giving them just enough time to suggest they were taking the deadline seriously while still maintaining maximum dramatic tension. "General Vexthara," the message began, delivered by Admiral Hartley in her most professional diplomatic voice. "The United Earth Defense Council has reviewed your generous offer of subjugation and finds it intriguing. However, we must respectfully request clarification on several procedural matters before we can properly respond." What followed was 17 pages of meticulously researched questions about Keth'moran surrender protocols, including such gems as, what is the precise kneeling posture required for species with bilateral symmetry? And, are there specific vocalizations that must accompany the submission ceremony? And Cross's personal favorite, should the surrender be conducted by representatives of our government, our military, or our spiritual leaders, and if all three are required, what is the proper order of precedence? The response came back 8 hours later, and Cross could practically hear the bewilderment in Vexthara's voice through the holographic projection. "Human delegation," she said, apparently having some difficulty with the concept. "Your queries are unusually detailed. Most species simply kneel when instructed to do so. Ah, Admiral Hartley replied smoothly. But we wouldn't want to accidentally offend through improper procedure. We understand that the Keth'moran Empire places great value on proper protocol, and we wish to show appropriate respect. Cross watched Vexthara's expression shift through several interesting configurations. Suspicion, confusion, and what might have been the beginning of a migraine played across her reptilian features like clouds passing over an alien sun. Very well, she said finally. I will transmit the complete ceremonial requirements. You will have 24 hours to comply once you receive them. The transmission ended, and Cross found himself grinning despite the circumstances. Did she just take the bait? Oh, she took it, Torres said, practically bouncing with excitement. Do you have any idea how complex Keth'moran ceremonial protocols are? We're talking about a civilization that has specific rituals for everything from declaring war to ordering lunch. Their surrender ceremony is going to be... He paused, apparently overcome by the sheer magnitude of bureaucratic possibility. How complex are we talking here? Vasquez asked. Torres pulled up a preliminary analysis on his tablet. Well, based on what I've been able to extrapolate from their other cultural practices, somewhere between a papal coronation and filing your taxes in triplicate. The Keth'moran ceremonial requirements, when they finally arrived, were everything Torres had hoped for and more. The document was 847 pages long, included detailed diagrams of proper kneeling postures, specified the exact words to be spoken at each stage of the ceremony, and required no fewer than 17 different types of witnesses, each with their own specific roles and responsibilities. This is insane, Cross muttered, scrolling through page after page of arcane regulations. Listen to this. The primary supplicant must maintain eye contact with the receiving authority for no less than 30 seconds, but no more than 45 seconds, as longer contact may be interpreted as a challenge, while shorter contact suggests insufficient respect. It gets better, Torres said gleefully. Page 394 specifies that the surrender must be witnessed by representatives of at least 3 different governmental structures, 5 military ranks, and 9 distinct professional castes. Page 571 requires that the ceremony take place at a location that is symbolically significant, but militarily neutral. And page 672, he paused for dramatic effect. Page 672 states that the surrendering species must provide a complete inventory of their military assets, technological capabilities, and cultural artifacts. How complete? Admiral Hartley asked, though from her expression, Cross suspected she already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology more advanced than basic metallurgy, plus detailed explanations of how everything works, who built it, when it was deployed, and what its current operational status is. Cross leaned back in his chair, finally understanding the true scope of what they were attempting. They want us to catalog our entire civilization. In triplicate, Torres confirmed, with proper authentication seals and sworn affidavits from appropriate authorities. The beauty of it was becoming clear. Humanity's space fleet might be pathetically small by galactic standards, but their bureaucracy was absolutely world-class. They had spent centuries perfecting the art of making simple processes unbearably complicated. If the Keth'morans wanted paperwork, humanity could provide paperwork. How long would it take to actually complete all this? Vasquez asked. Torres did some quick calculations. Assuming we work around the clock with every available clerk, secretary, and administrative assistant on the planet, about 6 months, minimum. And they expect us to do this in 24 hours? That's what the protocol says, Torres confirmed. Unless... He trailed off, wearing the expression of someone who had just discovered a particularly juicy loophole in the fine print. Unless what? Cross prompted. Well, according to subsection 47C, if the surrendering party cannot complete the requirements within the specified time frame due to the complexity of their civilization, they may request an extension. The extension must be granted if they can demonstrate that they're making good faith efforts to comply. Admiral Hartley's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Define good faith efforts, daily progress reports, regular inspections by Keth'moran observers, and continuous work on the required documentation. Torres paused, plus detailed explanations of any delays, complications, or procedural difficulties encountered. Cross started laughing. He couldn't help it. The idea was so absolutely, perfectly human that it bordered on the sublime. They were going to surrender to a superior alien force by boring them into submission. Are we seriously going to try this? He asked. Do you have a better idea? Hartley replied. Cross considered this. They could fight, but they'd lose spectacularly and take the rest of humanity with them. They could surrender immediately. but that would mean spending the rest of eternity as junior partners in someone else's empire. Or they could embrace the chaos, lean into the absurdity, and see what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable bureaucracy. When he put it like that, there really wasn't much of a choice. "All right," he said. "Let's see how the mighty Keth'moran Empire handles a good old-fashioned administrative nightmare." The initial response was transmitted 18 hours after receiving the ceremonial requirements, cutting things close enough to suggest urgency, while leaving enough time to demonstrate that they were taking the process seriously. "General Vexthara," Admiral Hartley began, "we have reviewed the ceremonial requirements, and are honored by the complexity and dignity of Keth'moran traditions. However, we must respectfully request an extension to properly complete the documentation process." What followed was a masterpiece of bureaucratic theater. They provided detailed breakdowns of Earth's governmental structure, including helpful organizational charts showing the relationships between federal, state, and local authorities, complete inventories of their military assets, down to individual serial numbers and maintenance records, and comprehensive explanations of why each required piece of documentation would take significant time to properly prepare. "For example," the message continued, "our military operates under a complex system of civilian oversight that requires authorization from multiple governmental bodies before sensitive information can be released. The process of obtaining proper clearance for the requested technical specifications will require coordination between 17 different agencies, each with their own internal review procedures." Cross watched the transmission with something approaching professional admiration. Hartley wasn't just asking for more time. She was providing a complete roadmap of exactly how complicated the human bureaucratic system could be when it really put its mind to it. "Furthermore," the message went on, "our technological development has followed a highly distributed model involving thousands of independent research institutions, private corporations, and government agencies. Compiling comprehensive technical documentation will require coordination with each of these entities, many of which have their own proprietary information protection protocols." The coup de grace came at the end. "In the spirit of full compliance with Keth'moran ceremonial requirements, we have prepared a preliminary timeline for completing each aspect of the surrender documentation. We estimate this process will require approximately 4 months, during which time we would be honored to host Keth'moran observers to verify our progress and provide guidance on proper procedural compliance." The transmission ended, and the bridge of the Defiance fell silent as everyone contemplated what they had just witnessed. "Did we just invite them to supervise our surrender?" Vasquez asked finally. "We invited them to participate in the most elaborate, time-consuming, and thoroughly documented surrender in galactic history," Cross corrected. "There's a difference." General Vexthara's response came back 6 hours later, and Cross had to give her credit. She was clearly struggling with a situation that fell completely outside her experience. "Human delegation," she began, and Cross could hear the strain in her voice. "Your thoroughness is noted. However, the Keth'moran Empire does not typically engage in extended surrender negotiations." A pause, during which Cross imagined her consulting with advisors who were probably as confused as she was. "Nevertheless," she continued, "we acknowledge the complexity of your governmental structure and the apparent scope of your technological development. We will dispatch observers to monitor your compliance efforts. You have 60 days to complete the required documentation." 60 days. Cross had to admit, he'd been expecting her to refuse outright, or just start shooting. The fact that she was actually engaging with their bureaucratic gambit suggested that Torres had been right about Keth'moran cultural programming. They literally couldn't ignore their own protocols, even when dealing with a species that was clearly gaming the system. "Think she's suspicious?" Vasquez asked. "Oh, she's absolutely suspicious," Cross replied. "But she's also stuck. She demanded a formal surrender. We're giving her a formal surrender, and her own cultural rules won't let her complain about us being too formal." The next week was a masterclass in organized chaos. Teams of clerks, administrators, and military personnel across the solar system threw themselves into the task of documenting human civilization with the kind of obsessive attention to detail usually reserved for tax audits and insurance claims. The military inventory alone was a work of art. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of equipment was cataloged with serial numbers, technical specifications, deployment history, and current operational status. The UES Defiance entry, for example, was 17 pages long and included everything from the ship's original construction contracts to the maintenance logs for the coffee dispenser in the crew lounge. But the real genius was in the civilian documentation. Someone, Cross suspected Torres, had decided that if they were going to catalog human technology, they needed to be thorough. which meant documenting not just military hardware, but everything. Every computer, every communication device, every piece of industrial equipment, every scientific instrument, every medical device, every transportation vehicle, and every piece of consumer electronics on Earth and in the colonies. The preliminary inventory topped 1,000,000 pages before they'd even finished categorizing personal computers. Meanwhile, the first group of Keth'moran observers arrived aboard a vessel that made human ships look like toys. Cross met them at the airlock of the Defiance, where they'd requested permission to conduct an inspection. The lead observer was a Keth'moran named Sub-Commander Zexneal, who stood roughly 9 feet tall and had the kind of rigid military bearing that suggested he took regulations very, very seriously. He was accompanied by 2 assistants and enough recording equipment to document a small war. "Captain Cross," Zexneal said in heavily accented but grammatically perfect English, "I am here to observe your compliance with surrender protocols." "Welcome aboard," Cross replied with his most professional smile. "We're honored by your presence. Would you like to begin with a tour of our documentation process, or would you prefer to review the preliminary inventory first?" Zexneal's reptilian features shifted in what might have been confusion. "You have preliminary documentation?" "Oh yes," Cross said cheerfully. "We've completed about 12% of the required inventory so far. Would you like to see?" He led the Keth'moran delegation to what had previously been the ship's secondary cargo bay, which was now filled with computer terminals, filing cabinets, and enough paperwork to deforest a small planet. A team of junior officers was working their way through technical manuals, cross-referencing serial numbers, and updating database entries with the kind of methodical precision that made watching paint dry look exciting. Zexneal stared at the scene for a long moment. "This is all for the surrender documentation?" "This is just for the military inventory section," Cross confirmed. "The civilian technology documentation is being handled planet-side, since we needed more storage space." "How much more storage space?" Cross checked his tablet. "Currently about 47 warehouses, though we're expecting to need at least 60 by the time we're finished. The civilian electronics inventory alone is shaping up to be quite substantial." Zexneal's assistants were making notes on their own devices, apparently struggling to process what they were witnessing. One of them spoke up in what Cross assumed was their native language, a series of clicks and hisses that sounded vaguely distressed. "My colleague inquires about the scope of your civilian technology," Zexneal translated. "This seems extensive for a species that has only recently achieved interstellar travel." "Well," Cross said thoughtfully, "we've always been rather fond of gadgets. Plus, our economic system encourages rapid innovation and mass production. Most of our citizens own dozens of electronic devices, and our manufacturing sector produces millions of new items every day." He pulled up a sample page from the civilian inventory on his tablet. "For example, this is just the preliminary documentation for personal communication devices in the North American sector. As you can see, we've identified 847 distinct models currently in use, manufactured by 312 different companies, with a total population of approximately 290 million individual units." Zexneal's translator device made a small choking sound. "And this is representative of your global technology base?" he asked carefully. "Oh no," Cross said brightly. "This is just one category of device in one geographic region. We estimate there are roughly 50,000 distinct categories of civilian technology in current use across all human settlements." The silence that followed was the kind that usually precedes either revelations or nervous breakdowns. Cross wasn't entirely sure which one he was witnessing. "Perhaps," Zexneal said finally, "we should review your progress reports." The progress reports were, if anything, even more impressive than the actual documentation. Each day, teams of clerks and administrators across the solar system submitted detailed updates on their assigned sections of the inventory. These reports included not just what had been completed, but also what challenges had been encountered, what additional resources were needed, and what estimated timeline adjustments were required. The challenges, Cross had to admit, were genuinely complicated. Human technology wasn't just numerous, it was chaotic. Unlike the Keth'morans, who seemed to prefer standardized designs that remained unchanged for centuries, humans had a pathological need to tinker with things. Every manufacturer had their own proprietary standards, every model had dozens of variations, and every few months someone would invent something completely new that made everything else obsolete. Documenting it all required not just cataloging what existed, but also explaining how it had evolved, what it was replacing, and how it fit into the broader technological ecosystem. The documentation for personal computers alone required a 40-page appendix just to explain the difference between operating systems. "This is madness," Zexanil muttered on day 12 of his inspection, staring at a progress report that covered developments in human transportation technology. Your species has 4,147 distinct models of ground vehicles currently in production? That's just passenger cars, Cross explained helpfully. Commercial vehicles, recreational vehicles, and specialized equipment would be separate categories. Why do you need 4,847 different types of passenger vehicle? Cross considered this question seriously. It was, he had to admit, a fair point. Well, different vehicles are optimized for different purposes. Size, fuel efficiency, terrain capability, weather conditions, passenger capacity, cargo space, aesthetic preferences. He trailed off, realizing that he was essentially explaining why humans had managed to turn the simple concept of transportation into an industry that produced thousands of variations on what was fundamentally the same basic idea. Your species appears to suffer from chronic inefficiency, Zexanil observed. Oh, absolutely, Cross agreed. We're terrible at standardization. Give us a perfectly functional design, and within 6 months someone will have invented 17 different ways to make it more complicated. Zexanil made another note on his device. Cross was beginning to suspect that the Keth'moran Observer was filing reports of his own, and that those reports were probably making for very interesting reading back at Fleet headquarters. The real breakthrough came on day 18, when the preliminary cultural artifacts inventory was submitted. This had been Torres's idea, and Cross had to admit it was inspired. The surrender protocols didn't just require documentation of technology and military assets. They also called for comprehensive cultural artifacts that would help the Keth'morans understand human civilization. The problem, from a Keth'moran perspective, was that human culture was even more chaotic than human technology. You have 12,000 distinct languages? Zexanil asked, staring at the linguistic diversity report. That's just the ones still in active use, Cross confirmed. Historical languages would probably double that number. And 47,000 different musical genres? The classification system is somewhat subjective, Cross admitted. Some musicologists argue that we're double-counting subgenres, but others maintain that the distinctions are culturally significant. Zexanil's translator device was starting to make stressed electronic noises. And you have documented 340,000 distinct religious and philosophical traditions? That's including regional variations and historical denominations, Cross said. The core belief systems are somewhat more manageable, only about 15,000 of those. Only, Zexanil repeated faintly. Cross was beginning to feel a little sorry for the Keth'moran Observer. The poor guy had probably expected to spend a few days watching humans shuffle paperwork before filing a report confirming their compliance. Instead, he was being forced to confront the reality that human civilization was an anarchic carnival of creativity, innovation, and chronic inability to leave well enough alone. Perhaps, Zexanil suggested after a long pause, we could focus on the more significant cultural elements. Well, that's going to be tricky, Cross said thoughtfully. The thing is, significance is culturally relative. What seems important to one group might be completely irrelevant to another. That's why we've been documenting everything. We don't want to accidentally exclude something that might be culturally significant to the Keth'moran evaluation process. It was a beautifully crafted trap, and Cross could see Zexanil walking right into it. The Observer's own cultural programming demanded thoroughness and proper procedure. He couldn't ask them to skip documenting human culture without essentially admitting that Keth'moran's surrender protocols were flawed. Continue your documentation efforts, Zexanil said finally, with the air of someone who had just realized he was trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare of his own people's making. By day 30, the situation was spiraling into something that was either a diplomatic triumph or a complete disaster, depending on your perspective. The documentation effort had expanded to involve nearly every government employee, academic institution, and private corporation in the solar system. The daily progress reports were coming in at a rate of roughly 1,000 pages per day, and the preliminary inventories had exceeded 10 million pages. More importantly, humanity had managed to turn its surrender into a collaborative educational experience. Keth'moran observers were now stationed at facilities across the solar system, supposedly monitoring compliance but actually getting drawn into increasingly detailed discussions about human technology, culture, and philosophy. Cross received daily reports from the other observation sites, and they were uniformly bizarre. The team at the Mars Technological Research Station had spent 3 days explaining the theoretical differences between 17 competing approaches to artificial intelligence design. The observers at the Luna Cultural Archives had requested additional personnel to help them understand the significance of human artistic traditions, and were currently working their way through a comprehensive survey of Earth's musical history. Most remarkably, The team at the Jupiter orbital shipyards had somehow gotten into a technical discussion about the relative merits of different approaches to faster-than-light travel, during which the Keth'moran observers had inadvertently revealed several key principles behind their own propulsion technology. "They're not just observing anymore," reported Dr. Torres, the liaison at the Jupiter facility. "They're participating. Yesterday, one of their engineers suggested a modification to our fusion reactor design that would improve efficiency by about 15%. Cross stared at his holographic image in disbelief. "They're helping us improve our technology?" "It started as a discussion about why our documentation was taking so long," Torres explained. "But when they realized that part of the delay was because we were trying to reverse engineer some of our own systems that we didn't fully understand, they started offering suggestions." "And they don't see this as a problem?" "I think they're as confused as we are," Torres admitted. "Their cultural programming says they're supposed to be observing our surrender, but their professional instincts as engineers are telling them to help solve technical problems. It's like watching someone try to follow two contradictory sets of instructions simultaneously." Cross leaned back in his chair, trying to process the implications. Somehow, humanity's bureaucratic surrender had turned into an impromptu cultural exchange program. The Keth'morans had come expecting to accept a formal capitulation, and instead they were getting a crash course in the beautiful chaos of human civilization. More importantly, they were starting to like it. "Captain," Vasquez said quietly, "we're getting a priority transmission from Admiral Hartley." The Admiral's hologram materialized on the bridge, wearing an expression that Cross couldn't quite decipher. It might have been triumph, panic, or simply the look of someone who had just realized they were living through a historical moment that no one would ever quite believe. "Captain Cross," she said, "we have a situation." "Good situation or bad situation?" "That's actually a very good question," Hartley replied. "General Vexthara has requested a direct meeting with our senior diplomatic staff." Cross felt his stomach drop. "She's calling off the surrender process?" "She's requesting clarification on the scope of the cultural exchange protocols." There was a pause while Cross tried to parse that sentence. "The what now?" "Apparently," Hartley said with the kind of careful precision that suggested she was still trying to believe it herself, "several of her observation teams have submitted reports recommending formal diplomatic and technological exchange agreements with humanity." Cross blinked. "They want to trade with us?" "They want to trade with us, learn from us, and possibly establish permanent cultural liaison offices." Hartley paused. "Captain, I think we accidentally convinced them that we're more interesting as allies than as subjects." The meeting with General Vexthara took place aboard her flagship, a vessel so large that it had its own weather patterns. Cross attended as part of the human diplomatic delegation, along with Admiral Hartley, Dr. Torres, and a half-dozen other officials who had spent the last month orchestrating humanity's most elaborate bureaucratic gambit. Vexthara herself was even more impressive in person than she had been in holographic projection. 12 feet tall, covered in blue-scaled armor that seemed to be part natural hide and part advanced technology, she moved with the kind of predatory grace that suggested she could personally dismember most of the human delegation without working up a sweat. But there was something different about her demeanor. The casual contempt was gone, replaced by what Cross could only describe as professional confusion. "Human delegation," she began, then paused. "I find myself in an unusual position." "How so, General?" Admiral Hartley asked politely. "In 10,000 years of conquest, the Keth'moran Empire has never encountered a species quite like yours." She gestured to a series of holographic displays showing the documentation progress. "My observers report that your surrender compliance efforts have been educational." Cross exchanged a glance with Torres, who was trying very hard not to look smug. "We've endeavored to be thorough," Admiral Hartley said diplomatically. "Thorough," Vexthara repeated, and Cross could have sworn he heard something like amusement in her voice. "Sub-Commander Zex Neal's reports describe your species as creatively chaotic, technologically prolific, and philosophically fascinating. These are not terms typically associated with conquered peoples." She pulled up one of the progress reports, and Cross recognized it as the cultural diversity analysis from the previous week. "Your species has independently developed 340,000 distinct belief systems," she continued. "The Keth'moran Empire, across all conquered worlds, has encountered perhaps 200 such systems in its entire history. Your single planet contains more philosophical diversity than our entire galactic sector." "We've always been rather fond of overthinking things," Cross offered. Vexthara's reptilian features shifted in what might have been a smile. "Indeed. My technology assessment teams report similar findings. Your species has developed 47 different approaches to faster-than-light communication, 23 distinct methods of artificial intelligence architecture, and 156 separate theoretical frameworks for quantum mechanics. Most civilizations master one approach to each field and consider the problem solved. Where's the fun in that? Torres asked, apparently unable to help himself. Fun, Vexthara repeated, as if the word were foreign to her. Yes, that appears to be a significant factor in your technological development. My observers report that many of your innovations seem to have been developed not because they were necessary, but because someone found the challenge entertaining. She paused, studying the human delegation with an expression that Cross was beginning to recognize as genuine curiosity. This presents me with a dilemma, she continued. The standard Keth'moran approach to newly encountered civilizations assumes that absorption into the Empire represents an improvement to their condition. We offer superior technology, galactic citizenship, and protection in exchange for loyalty and tribute. Sounds reasonable, Admiral Hartley said carefully. However, Vexthara said, my technical teams have identified 17 human innovations that represent significant advances over current Keth'moran technology. My cultural advisors report that human artistic and philosophical traditions offer unique perspectives that could enrich imperial society. And my strategic analysts suggest that human creativity and adaptability could provide valuable capabilities for future imperial operations. Cross was beginning to see where this was heading, and he wasn't sure whether to be excited or terrified. What are you saying, General? Admiral Hartley asked. I am saying, Vexthara replied with the air of someone making a decision that was going to cause tremendous headaches for her superiors, that the Keth'moran Empire would be interested in negotiating a formal alliance rather than a conquest. The human delegation sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing what they had just heard. An alliance? Torres asked finally. A partnership, Vexthara confirmed. Cultural and technological exchange, mutual defense agreements, shared research initiatives. Your species would retain full autonomy over your territory and government while gaining access to imperial resources and protection. Cross leaned forward, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. And in exchange? In exchange, you continue being yourselves, Vexthara said simply. Your chaos, your creativity, your inability to leave well enough alone. The Empire has grown, perhaps too rigid in its approaches. We could benefit from exposure to your particular brand of innovative thinking. She paused, then added with what was definitely amusement. Also, my observers have developed a deep appreciation for human bureaucratic thoroughness. Sub-Commander Zexnil has requested permanent assignment to your documentation project. He finds it intellectually stimulating. Admiral Hartley cleared her throat. General, this is a remarkable offer, but I have to ask, what happens if we decline? Vexthara considered this. Then you complete your surrender documentation, submit to Imperial authority, and become a client species, which, based on my observations, would be a tremendous waste of your potential. And if the Imperial High Command disagrees with your assessment, then I will spend considerable time explaining to them why conquering a species that has managed to turn a surrender negotiation into a graduate-level seminar on comparative civilization studies might not be the most efficient use of Imperial resources. Cross started laughing. He couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation was just too perfect. Humanity had set out to delay their own conquest through bureaucratic incompetence, and instead they had accidentally convinced their would-be conquerors that they were too interesting to subjugate. Captain Cross, Vexthara said, you find this amusing? General, Cross replied, wiping tears from his eyes. My species just talked its way out of extinction by being too weird to conquer. Yeah, I find that pretty funny. Vexthara's expression shifted again, and Cross realized she was actually smiling. It was a predatory, reptilian smile, but it was definitely genuine amusement. Your species, she said, is going to fit in very well with the Empire. The formal alliance negotiations took another 3 months, which was actually remarkably fast by both human and Keth'moran standards. The bureaucratic infrastructure that had been developed for the surrender documentation proved invaluable for handling the complex legal frameworks required for an interstellar partnership agreement. Cross watched the signing ceremony from the bridge of the Defiance, which was now part of the joint human Keth'moran patrol fleet responsible for maintaining security in the Sol system. It was, he reflected, a considerable improvement over their previous assignment of sit around waiting to be vaporized. The ceremony itself was conducted according to both human and Keth'moran diplomatic protocols, which meant it took nearly 6 hours and required participation from representatives of 17 different government agencies, 12 Keth'moran military ranks, and 23 distinct professional castes. It was, in other words, exactly the kind of elaborate, overcomplicated, bureaucratically intensive process that both species had apparently been designed to appreciate. "Think it'll work?" Vasquez asked, joining him at the observation deck. Cross considered the question. The alliance was ambitious, unprecedented, and based largely on the mutual recognition that both species were probably too stubborn to make it fail through simple incompetence. "Well," he said finally, "we managed to avoid getting conquered by accident. At this point, I'm willing to believe we can probably manage anything." On the view screen, he could see the joint research station that was already under construction in the asteroid belt, where human and Keth'moran scientists were working together on projects that neither species could have imagined alone. There were cultural exchange programs being established, joint military exercises being planned, and trade agreements being negotiated that would fundamentally reshape both civilizations. It was chaotic, complicated, and absolutely guaranteed to produce unexpected consequences that no one had planned for. In other words, it was perfectly human. "Besides," Cross added with a grin, "if it doesn't work out, we can always bury them in paperwork until they give up and go home." Vasquez snorted. "You realize they're going to expect us to fill out forms for everything now, right? Every supply requisition, every personnel transfer, every minor policy change is going to require approval from both human and Keth'moran authorities." Cross thought about this for a moment, then started laughing again. "Commander," he said, "I think you just identified the one thing that might actually destroy this alliance." "What's that?" "The sheer bureaucratic complexity is going to be so overwhelming that both species will probably give up and declare war just to simplify the paperwork." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the construction robots assemble humanity's first interstellar diplomatic facility. It was going to be magnificent, overcomplicated, and probably require its own dedicated administrative staff just to keep track of all the different regulatory requirements. "You know what the best part is?" Cross said finally. "What's that?" "General Vexthara still has no idea that we never actually intended to surrender in the first place." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "We didn't?" Cross grinned. "Elena, did you really think a species that spent the last century making movies about the nobility of hopeless last stands was going to just roll over and submit to alien overlords? So what was the plan?" "There was no plan," Cross admitted. "We were just going to be as difficult and annoying as possible until something interesting happened." "And something interesting did happen." "Something interesting did happen," Cross confirmed. "We accidentally became allies with the most powerful military force in the galaxy by being too chaotic for them to process." Vasquez shook her head in amazement. "Only humans would stumble into interstellar diplomacy through bureaucratic warfare." "Hey," Cross said. "It worked, didn't it?" On the view screen, the first shuttle full of human cultural attachés was docking with a Keth'moran diplomatic vessel, beginning what was probably going to be the most interesting and confusing cultural exchange program in galactic history. Somewhere in the fleet, Subcommander Zexnil was undoubtedly working on yet another progress report, documenting the latest developments in human technological chaos, with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that suggested he had found his true calling in life. And in the diplomatic quarters of General Vexthara's flagship, Cross was willing to bet someone was trying to explain to the Imperial High Command why their newest allies were simultaneously the most valuable and most exasperating species they had ever encountered. It was, Cross decided, exactly the kind of perfectly imperfect solution that humanity specialized in. They hadn't conquered their would-be conquerors through superior firepower or brilliant strategy. They had simply been so authentically, irreducibly human that the alternative became more appealing than conquest. "So what happens now?" Vasquez asked. Cross looked out at the stars, where human and Keth'moran ships were beginning their first joint patrol of the outer system. Somewhere out there, other species were probably going about their business, completely unaware that the galactic balance of power had just shifted, because one species had discovered that the other was too interesting to destroy. "Now," Cross said, "we get to find out what happens when you give humans access to 10,000-year-old alien technology and tell them they're free to tinker with it." Vasquez paled slightly. "That's either going to be amazing or catastrophic." "Probably both," Cross agreed cheerfully. "But hey, at least it won't be boring." And as the Defiance moved into formation with its new Keth'moran partnerships, Cross couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the universe had been waiting for exactly this kind of beautiful chaos all along. Epilogue. 6 months later. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called after reports began filtering in about unusual activity in the Sol system. According to the intelligence reports, the Keth'moran Empire had not only failed to conquer humanity, but had somehow been convinced to enter into a full military and technological alliance with them. "This is unprecedented," declared Councillor Keth'moran of the Vril hegemony, his four eyes blinking in rapid succession, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. "The Keth'morans have never negotiated with a primitive species. They conquer, absorb, and move on." "Perhaps," suggested Councillor Zephania of the Stellar Confederation, "the humans weren't as primitive as we assumed." "They had 27 ships," Keth'moran replied incredulously.
27!
"My personal yacht has a larger escort fleet." The debate might have continued for hours. Galactic Council sessions were notorious for their inefficiency, but it was interrupted by an incoming transmission that made everyone in the chamber fall silent. General Vexthara appeared in holographic projection, but she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a human in what appeared to be a military uniform, and the dynamic between them suggested partnership rather than subjugation. "Honored councillors," Vexthara began, "I am transmitting to inform you of a new development in this sector. The Keth'moran Empire has entered into a formal alliance with the United Earth Defense Force." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either standing ovations or complete riots. "As part of this alliance," Vexthara continued, "we will be establishing joint research facilities, cultural exchange programs, and combined military operations. We anticipate that this partnership will significantly enhance the security and prosperity of this region." Councillor Keth'moran found his voice first. "General Vexthara, surely you cannot be serious. These humans are barely capable of interstellar travel." The human beside Vexthara stepped forward. "Councillor Keth'moran, I'm Admiral Rebecca Hartley of the United Earth Defense Force. While it's true that humanity is relatively new to interstellar civilization, we've found that our partnership with the Keth'moran Empire offers significant advantages to both species." "What possible advantages could you offer the Keth'moran Empire?" demanded Councillor Zephania. Admiral Hartley and General Vexthara exchanged what could only be described as a conspiratorial look. "Well," Hartley said with a slight smile, "for starters, we've helped them reduce their military logistics overhead by approximately 30% through improved efficiency protocols. We have also," Vexthara added, "gained access to human innovation methodologies, which have already produced 17 significant technological improvements to Imperial systems. But most importantly," Admiral Hartley continued, "we've discovered that our combined capabilities are considerably more effective than either species operating independently." To demonstrate this point, the transmission shifted to show the joint human Keth'moran fleet conducting training exercises in the outer Sol system. The display was impressive enough, but what really caught the Council's attention was the tactical coordination between the two forces. Human ships, still small by galactic standards, were seamlessly integrated with Keth'moran vessels in formations that maximized the strengths of both fleets. "As you can see," General Vexthara said, "our alliance has proven mutually beneficial." The transmission ended, leaving the Galactic Council in stunned silence. "Did they just," Councillor Keth'moran began, "threaten us?" Councillor Zephania finished. "I think they might have." It wasn't exactly a threat, but the message was clear enough. The Sol system was now under the protection of the most feared military force in the galaxy, backed by the most creatively unpredictable species anyone had encountered in recent memory. The political implications were staggering. "Well," Councillor Keth'moran said finally, "this should be interesting." And in the observation lounge of the UES Defiance, Captain Daniel Cross raised a glass of synthol in a toast to his Keth'moran counterpart, Sub-Commander Zexnil, who had indeed received permanent assignment to the human fleet and seemed to be thoroughly enjoying his new role as intercultural liaison officer. "To bureaucratic warfare," Cross said. "To the most entertainingly complicated alliance in galactic history," Zexnil replied in his steadily improving English. They drank, and outside the viewport, the stars stretched away toward a future that was going to be anything but predictable. After all, they had just turned the galaxy's most efficient conquerors into partners in humanity's ongoing project of making everything more complicated than it needed to be. It was, Cross thought with satisfaction, exactly the kind of victory that only humans could have achieved. Accidental, improbable, and absolutely guaranteed to annoy everyone else in the galaxy. And that, he decided, was probably the most human outcome possible. The end.